Hello, backcountry.church. I am so excited you're here. We are doing a conversation with John Doryk, who lives in Colorado Springs, one of my favorite cities in the U.S. John, I'm so excited that you're here.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
Now,
It's
it's funny because John and I got connected of kind of a variety of ways, and I am looking forward to being out there with you, John, soon. But why don't you tell us what you do for a living? That's pretty interesting.
okay. Well, for a living, I'm actually an award-winning motion picture film composer and supervising sound editor. So I make the music and the sound effects and supervise the sound for documentaries, movies, TV shows. Been doing it for about 35 years, and I do it out of Colorado Springs, but I didn't get started here. I have clients in Los Angeles, London, Nashville, New York, pretty much everywhere, Hong Kong,
Now, John loves the outdoors. So I could give you a list of things, but what? So you go hiking.
I'm a hiker. I
Backpacking.
backpack. I technical rock climb. I technical ice climb, mountaineering. Yeah.
Stargazing.
Backcountry skiing. Yeah, some of that too.
Yeah, too much fun. In fact, I'm looking forward to all things being equal, ice climbing with you sometime in, maybe next year. We'll see how it works out.
Would love to take you. Would love to take you. There's a really cool spot not too far from here that I take a lot of people for the first. Would it be your first time?
It would be my first time.
Okay, and, yeah. This is a place we've taken. I don't want to say beginners, but yeah, first timers.
And hopefully not my last time. But
no.
One of the things that John has done for, let's just say, a couple years is I would call you a semi-professional astronomer. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you got it pretty close. I was an astronomy and physics major back in college. It's another long story. That could be a different interview. Like, how did I land up being that, studying that in college, and lining up becoming a composer and sound editor for a living? But when I did change careers, my passion for astronomy never went away, and so I've been absolutely passionate about it and used it as an outreach for almost 45 years now.
Wow. So I'm going to put up on the screen here. You have some toys. I'm going to call them toys. Equipment that you use. There is one telescope that is very large. I want to say it's like 2 stories.
Almost. Yeah, it's probably 12 or 14 feet high. Telescopes get rated mostly by the diameter of their mirror or objective lens, because that's how much light they can gather. They're basically mechanical light intensifiers that help you see things that are much too faint to see normally with your naked eye. And this particular telescope is a 20-inch Dobsonian, and so the mirror is 20 inches in diameter, gets almost 9,000 times more light than your eye. And you can see spiral arms and galaxies and storms on clouds in Jupiter and globular star clusters and color nebula and all kinds of fun stuff like that.
That's amazing. So you mentioned about dark skies. It's one thing I've recently become acquainted with. Now, when I was a kid here in Santa Clara County, in the Bay Area, California, when I would go outside, this is back in the late 60s, early 70s. When I would go outside, I could see the night sky and I could see just countless stars. You can't do that today around in the same location. So there's something called International Dark Skies or something like that. What is that?
Yeah, the International Dark Sky Association, or there's also dark sky associations and a number of different kinds. They're basically, one way you could say they're battling light pollution. And some people say, what is light pollution? There's all kinds of other pollution. Now there's light pollution too. Well, yeah, in the sense that there are the places where you can go and see a dark sky and see the Milky Way and see many, many stars are getting less and less. Not just in this country, but in the world. And so the International Dark Sky Association creates designations for communities, for parks, for national parks and monuments, to preserve those dark night skies. And it's for several different reasons. One, it's a legacy, the people that have grown up and seeing the night sky, and to encourage and to encourage and bring people into an appreciation and love for the night sky and the heavens. But there's also a biological and there's also physiological effects by not having those dark skies, both to animals, to environments, and also to humans as well. So that's kind of their mission, and what they eventually do. If you have a dark sky park or a dark sky a wilderness area, they're preserving both the flora, the fauna, the animal life, but then creating a place where you can go and see a dark night sky. If it's a dark sky community that's designated as a dark sky community, that means the people living in that area are going to use a certain kind of lighting that's going to preserve the night sky. And actually, at the end of the day, that lighting creates a better security, and it costs less. Because you're not shooting all this energy up into the sky where nobody's getting any benefit from it, and it's just making your sky worse. So in the end, it's kind of a win-win situation for communities.
So I was recently at Mammoth Caves or Cave National Park. That's an international designated dark sky. I was at Death Valley, and that's an international.
Same thing. It's international dark sky site. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. I don't know if we've talked about this, but when I was a kid looking up, I would be awed by the sky. There was something in me that it's hard to describe the connection. When people don't see the dark sky, meaning the stars in the sky or the galaxies that you can see with the naked eye, what happens to us as a result of that, of not seeing and connecting with that? Let's say that goes away. Does it matter?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I mean, deep down to the well, does it have a physiological effect on us? Does it cause a higher level of stress? Does it do this? I don't know. I do know this. In my life, kind of like with you, I was born in Canada, but I grew up in South Florida. And when I was younger, it was pretty easy to see and find dark skies. And we'd either be able to literally look out our backyard, or a short drive, and we'd be able to see the Milky Way and many of the constellations and stars and so forth. As I got older and toward my college years, which was still for me in the 90s, mid to late 90s, already living in South Florida, you had to drive 2-3 hours to get to someplace that had it. I had to drive 2 to 3 hours to 4 hours to get to a place that was about the same as my backyard here in Colorado Springs. And to see something like the skies that I see here, you couldn't find any place, by the late 90s to 2000s in South Florida. So much population, so much light pollution. And I do think, I don't know if I can tell you what the negatives are of not being able to see that, but I can tell you the positives. It definitely people have rekindled an interest in it. It connects them with the universe around them. It connects them with something larger than what they are and their immediate world and issues. And it also kind of tends to unify a lot of people. And I'll just make a simple comment from experience about this. When I got back re-involved, which is now almost 10, 15 years ago, I've been like an amateur astronomer for many, many years. But when I got re-involved into doing outreach, I started doing outreach with some people here in town thinking, we're going to get 5, 10, 15 people show up to us, setting up a couple of nerds, setting up a couple of telescopes in a dark place. And if it was in a really dark place, meant it was a bit of a drive. I thought, nobody's showing up to this. And we would have 200 people, 500 people, 1,000 people show up. And I'm going, you're kidding. Wow. Not because I don't think it's worth seeing, but I was amazed that many people were that fascinated by it and were willing to drive. Like one of the images you have that you may show is Florissant Fossil Beds National Monument. It is an international dark sky site. We've had as many as 300 people show up, and Florissant is the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's not like just around the corner from town. It's a good I mean, here in Colorado, things aren't, there's a lot of dark skies close, but it's still probably anywhere from a 45-minute to a 2-hour drive,
Mm.
from metropolitan areas here. And we never have 4 or 5 people, and we do it year round, winter through the winter too. They show up and we'll do stuff. Yes. So it's interesting. There's some kind of a connection that happens. And of course, I use this not only in a secular way to get people interested about the night sky, interested in astronomy and space careers and so forth. But I, of course, as a believer, use it also as a wonderful tool for outreach.
Right. So, one comment, I was watching a documentary on Death Valley. One of the things that the narrator said was we when we disconnect ourselves from the stars, we begin to think that we are the sole object of the universe.
Yeah.
When we connect with the stars and see it, we realize, as you said, there's something much, much bigger out there. Now, you're a Christ follower and know the scriptures well. So what does the Bible say about the heavens?
Sure. And this happens a lot for me. I do both faith-based and secular astronomy outreaches. And with the faith-based, I'm just, and even the faith-based, you'd be surprised how many people have never really stopped and taken a good look at the night sky or looked through a large telescope in the dark night sky. And so it helps to strengthen their faith. With the secular, of course, they're just out there because they're curious and they're wondrous about it. And in some of the groups, the secular groups, they'll say, well, we don't want you proselytizing because we're a secular group. Okay, I respect that. But if somebody asks you what you believe, go right ahead and tell them. Almost every time I go out with a secular group, people are so astounded with what they see that they go, tell me what, you've been into this for so long. What do you think this is all about? What do you think about this, about that? What do you believe in? Why are you out here? And I'll say, well, I'm out here because I'm just marveling at it, just like you, only I've been doing it for many more years. And as a believer, well, in Psalm 19, it says, the heavens declare the glory of God.
Mm.
And I've never had anybody, whatever belief they have, say to me, oh, no, they don't. No, this is no big deal. No, they're like, wow, yeah, well, and they'll even say sometimes, well, I'm kind of an agnostic, but yeah, I see what you mean. This is just stunning. It's so beautiful. And yeah, it's kind of like the old, there's no, what is it? There's no agnostics in foxholes, that kind of thing.
Right.
It's the same kind of thing. You go into a dark sky and I show people the stars, and I don't have to sit there and pound stuff down, cram it down their throats. I'm just like, hey, check this out. This is the Andromeda Galaxy. This is the Orion Nebula. It's a star that's dying and it's exploding. Some stars that are forming. Here's one of our planets, Jupiter. Those are cloud bands around it, and it's here's how large it is, and you're just describing all these things, and they're just in awe. And yeah, I mean, it's hard not to be. And of course, the Bible supports all of that. How much the stars are there, both for signs and seasons.
So you're saying that the heavens have God's fingerprints all over
Yeah,
them.
all over. Yep, yep. And even people who are diehard, naturalists or agnostics, even they, at one point or another in their writings and career, will say, "Well, it is also beautiful and elegant." And they may not want to admit who that designer is, but they'll often tend to lean. We were just at a this is going to sound like totally off topic, but it's not.
Yeah.
My wife and I were just at a wedding. My niece got married she lives in Boston, so we got to go to the Hayden Planetarium, which is an awesome planetarium, the Boston Museum of Science. And they had a lot of cool shows. I even actually saw a couple of them. I'm like, hey, I'm only going to be in Boston. When am I going to be back here again? So we spent the whole day there. But one of the planetarium shows was the search for what was the name of it? It was God, the universe, and the meaning of everything, or something like that. And I was like, this will be interesting. Very naturalistic. So I'm thinking this may be kind of cynical, or kind of saying, well, science is the answer to everything and all this religions. I didn't know what the show was going to be about. Well, turned out it was written by Dan Brown, Dan Brown, the Da Vinci Code, the author. Yeah. Now, whatever you think about his books, some people like them, some people don't. He does claim to be a believer. I believe he's Catholic, but in either case, here's a show playing at a major secular institution, basically in a very complimentary way, saying science is one way to explain the universe, theology is another way to explain the universe, and they're not really at odds with each other. They
Oh,
actually mesh together. And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. And
that
and the
is
funny
cool.
thing is that, yeah, funny thing is that you'll often find not all these guys are brand new, but a few years back, an astrophysicist who was not a believer, Robert Jastrow,
Mhm.
what his famous expression was, he said, and he's not the only one that's had said things like this, but he was one of them that said this. This was really cool. He said, scientists are continually trying to climb the mountain of knowledge to find the meaning of the universe, only to get to the summit and find a group of theologians that were there all along. In other words, the more
That
they
is a,
learn, they're not sitting there by faith looking at, say, the Bible and going, well, that's what God says, so therefore it must be true. They're looking at the universe to see what they can find. And I think that's awesome. I think that's perfectly
well,
noble thing to
and
do.
and you
Yeah.
you literally just talked about our mission statement at backcountry.church, and that is we're simply helping people connect with God, others, and themselves through the enjoyment of nature. And one of the
Right.
things in this conversation with that we've never really talked about the skies and the stars and the galaxies and how these are God's fingerprints. And so we just
Yep.
want to introduce people to the one who made them because
Yep.
he loves them. He absolutely loves them. So if you're watching this right now, I would encourage you, and John, back me up on this, in the next 30 days, get out there and see a dark sky. Now, like if I'm living in, let's say Oklahoma or in Texas or in Washington, how would I know like where to go to see the dark skies?
Well, again, this is kind of cool because it's become much more of a thing now
Yeah.
than it was for many years. I would, a few years ago, I've said, well, look on a map and figure out where there aren't populated areas and there are rural areas or a campsite or BLM land, national forest, and try and go there.
Oh, right.
Now, literally, you can get online and say international dark sky places or good places to go dark sky stargazing. And almost every state has not only places you can go that they are now promoting, but in many cases, most states do have at least one dark sky park. Okay, there might be a few states that don't,
Sure.
but I mean, I just recently bumped into a guy from Virginia who lived not that far from DC, and it's like that's about as bad as you can ask. But a very active astronomy club, and yeah, they have an international dark sky park. I mean, is it as dark as what's out here, or as many? No, in the Rocky
Right.
Mountain,
Sure.
but they do. There are places they can go, and so when people say to me, "Where can I go to see a night sky?" Another question I'll often ask, "I want to buy a telescope. Who can I ask? Where can I go?" I'll say, before you buy anything, contact your local astronomy club. They often, like the library, they have loaners. They'll loan you a telescope. They'll loan you a
That's
$3,000 telescope just to
wow.
try it out.
I
Just to,
don't,
they'll teach you how to use it and everything
yeah,
first. But
I
and then they have star parties, so they have places they already go. The club that I belong to, we have our own 40-acre property about an hour south of Westcliff, Colorado, in a little town, literally 3 buildings called Gardner, Colorado, and we have a 40-acre property up at 9,000 feet. That is again, there's a scale of darkness. The very darkest skies that you can see anywhere, like in Hawaii or the Canary Islands, or in some cases, very center of central United States, Rocky Mountain region, is called Bortle 1. So they did it in a scale. It goes 1 to 9. 9 is downtown Miami or downtown New York.
right.
You can barely, a clear sky, you can barely see a star or two. 1 is where there's so little offensive light that you can see the Milky Way, you can see the zodiacal light, you can see there's just a lot of stuff you can see with your naked eye, that it's that dark. And yeah, you might not have Bortle 1 where you live, but there's probably a place you can go.
Where can I find that map online?
Oh, just type in dark sky map, and it'll show you. There's actually, and they'll come up, and it has different layers.
Yeah.
and it'll show you where the dark places are. But if you type in places to go stargazing, almost any state, there are sites now to that. And part of it is it's become a thing. There's a word for it now. It's called astrotourism, and people are actually seeking out. And it's interesting. You think about it, like philosophically, even theologically, why are people so enthused now about wanting to find dark skies and be out, for that matter, be out in the mountains? It's like they've almost realized, even if they're not believers, they've realized they're missing a part of themselves. Yeah,
Exactly. So it's
yeah,
so funny. The more we're connected to our devices, our phones, our
yeah,
televisions, our
yeah,
laptops, like we're on right
yeah,
now,
yeah, yeah.
with the less we get connected to ourselves.
Yeah,
And
and
so
to each
there's
other, Yeah,
and
yeah. In
that's
fact, I'll tell you one of the. I mean, I'm as a believer, I've been involved with the church and worship team, and I'm an AV director, and I do sound and lighting and all of that stuff too. Um, and I have some wonderful friends in fellowship with all of that. But by far, the place where two things where I have the most strongest social interaction with other people, and two, the if it's not believers, the greatest, most organic opportunity to witness, it's out in the night sky, or it's backpacking or climbing, but it's in the night sky, because inevitably I don't even have to set it up. I just show people stuff that I know. And same way, even with believers, we're not all sitting there being very quiet, staring into eyepieces
no,
or
that's
looking at computers. We're talking about stuff and showing each other stuff, and yeah, it's interesting that it's actually a very
this is
unifying kind
this is kind of like a commercial for backcountry.church.
of
This you are defining
what you
like
guys.
why we exist.
Yeah, yeah,
But hey, so let me ask you
sure.
some questions I haven't asked you before. So maybe I'll just ask a bunch of them, and you can give me some
Go
short
for it.
answers. First of all, the moon. So recently, NASA sent up a rocket. They circled the
Artemis.
moon.
Yep.
Yeah, and they're coming back. John, do you have any idea why it's taking us so long to go back and put somebody on the moon?
Oh, sure. And a number of my buddies, again, I was an astrophysics major. My goal when I was younger was to be a mission specialist on the shuttle program,
Oh,
which is now long gone. And we used to watch shuttle launches,
yeah.
and I actually was at the Challenger disaster. I was there. I saw it. And people go, "Oh, that's why you know we're no longer in that field, and that's why you moved to music." No, no, with space, with any kind of new endeavor, there's risk, and
Right.
nothing. Space travel is one of the riskiest things you can do. But what people don't remember is back then, when that happened, they were talking about shutting down the space program indefinitely.
Right.
And so suddenly all these people, I mean, they were laying off tens of thousands of people. And here I am, this kid getting his degree in astrophysics, and I'm going to get a job at Radio Shack selling batteries with this degree, because there's no jobs. And that was when Lord opened doors in music, which I was also talented in, who gifted to be able to do stuff with music and sound and so forth. And I thought, well, someday I may go back and finish out and add more stuff to the other degree, and maybe I will still land up working in space, space science. But we'll just see what happens. And 35 years later, I'm writing stuff for networks and feature film
Right.
projects and whatever. But the passion never went away. But I've got a couple of friends who are in that program, who did go on to become engineers, work through the shuttle program, and then from there, jumped into. Some of them worked for. Well, one of my buddies, he's a recently new friend, only 3 or 4 years. He's a flight controller for the International Space Station. So
Whoa.
he works out of Houston. Yeah, and he and I go backpacking and stargazing and stuff like that.
Wow.
And he's a believer, which is awesome. I didn't even know that. We just got to be friends and started hanging out and doing stuff. And then one day I said, I hope you don't get offended, but a lot of the stuff I look at it is, the heavens declare the glory of God. And he's like, oh yeah, me too. He's like, my dad's a Baptist pastor, and I'm like, oh, okay, cool. But a number of my other friends live in Florida by the Cape, by Cape Canaveral, or Cape Kennedy as it used to be called, and they are actually working on the Artemis program.
But
And
why
why
is it
did it
taking
take
us so
so?
long?
It's money. I mean, it's expensive, and for years. I mean, back when I was a student, so this is late '90s, they were talking about the commercialization of space, that
Right.
someday, but I mean, people tried to do it, nobody could succeed because the amount of money it costs to do, even if commercial enterprise could do it cheaper and more efficiently than the government could, it still was a buttload of
Yeah,
money,
yeah, yeah,
and nobody had that kind of money. Then
yeah.
you started getting people like, um,
Elon
you
Musk.
know, right, like
Yeah,
Musk with SpaceX. You had what's his name with Google, who's
yeah.
also gotten into you've gotten people like Virgin Galactic. You're getting people who are suddenly becoming interested and fascinated with space industry and space
Not
travel and
not Google, Amazon.
Amazon, Bezos.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're
right.
right. You're right. Absolutely. And so all of that has changed the playing field. I feel like what we're in right now, and it's not that we ever dropped out of space entirely, because we never did. When shuttle finally got ended, in fact, the space station was still up, and we were doing communication satellites and GPS
Right,
and weather, and I mean there's a lot, and we were sending probes out to Mars, out to Mercury, out to Venus, out to
right.
Jupiter, and I mean, so we JPL Labs has never gone out of business. They've never stopped doing what they do. But the size and scope of it, because it's substantially cheaper to build a small probe, send it to Mars. I mean, amazing to do it, but land it, like Opportunity,
Right.
landed on Mars and drive around a little
Okay.
autonomous.
So here's my
Yeah,
here's another question.
Artemis is a big project. It's a big deal.
All right. So are we going to Mars?
Well, that's what Musk wants to do, and I would say in many ways, because SpaceX is very tied in now as a contractor with NASA and with the Artemis program. That's part of the plan. The plan is to get to the moon, go back to the moon, settle, colonize on the moon. And again, these are their words, not mine. Colonize on the moon, do multiple missions, and eventually have a presence there that then would be used as a jumping point to Mars. And that's the plan.
That
Yeah,
would be amazing. Okay,
yeah.
another question. Are there aliens?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot, and I go, "Well, I am one, and I can show you the card. I have a card and everything." Uh, and they're like, "What?" I says, "Yeah, just don't get too close to me, because I might have to remove organs and probe your mind and stuff like that."
Okay, I have another question.
Yeah,
Why was Pluto demoted?
demoted. Okay, so
That
the first question they ask about aliens, and I'll say, you know, and this I'll say, whether they're talking to me as secular or they're talking to me and they know I'm a believer, and whether they're believers or not. And by the way, both ways you get all kinds of different kinds of questions asked. Like one side will be like, "Well, do you believe there's aliens?" I said, "Well, are you asking me, do I believe there could be life on other planets, in other star systems? Or are you asking me, are UFOs real, and are they actually extraterrestrials that are monitoring us?" And they're like, "Yeah, all of the above." And I'm like, "Well, okay, look, I don't know. Why are we on Mars anyway? We're looking for life, or signs, proof of past life. The life might have once existed there, water and so forth. Certainly, a lot of signs on Mars that look like there was water there at one time. So that's not an illogical conclusion to think there might have been life at one time. Could there be? Are there planets orbiting other star systems? Well, we now pretty confidently can say yes, there are. Or remember, when you look that far out in space, you're looking back in time, because light only travels so far, so fast. So anytime I'm looking at stuff out there, I have to say it was. You can't really say it is, because it is. Who knows what it is right now? But it was. So could there be life? There could be. And again, when I get into with believers, it goes different ways too, because they're like, "Well, are you saying because a lot of the secular other naturalists will say that's the whole point. We should be teeming with life all over the place, and the fact that we can't find life might be a proof of a single solitary God that created us." And I'm like, well, it could be, but if we do find life eventually, it doesn't disprove God at all. Could he have created? When we read Genesis, we read the Old Testament, it is very much from an earth-centered perspective. It's what man was experiencing, what God was inspiring through men to write, from a perspective of on earth. He didn't write us a Bible based on the Andromedans, 22 million light years away, because what does that have to do with us? And certainly, what would it have to do with us 5,000 years ago? you know
Right.
um so I go, yeah, there might be, I don't know. When people get into the stuff about UFOs, I go, well, here's the thing. When you ask me if I believe in UFOs, I go, UFO means unidentified flying object. Do I believe that you've seen flying objects that you couldn't identify? I'm sure you have, but most of them, and they're like, well, have you seen, John, have you seen things you couldn't identify? I'm like, eventually, no. Sometimes in the beginning, maybe, but eventually I usually figured out what it was. And I have had people, I mean, oh my goodness, everything from the little old lady next door when I lived in Florida who said, there's aliens, there's aliens. And she's pointing at this bright light and it's shining in the west. And I'm going, no, ma'am, that's the planet Venus. No, no, it isn't. I said, no, I got to tell us. Here, take a look. It looks like a little crescent moon. It's really cool. The other time I had a guy, an acquaintance I'd met on a film set working on some commercials, who was from Manhattan, and he had never been in a dark sky. And this is again a push for dark sky, right? And he tells me how he'd had an encounter with aliens one time. And I'm like, really? He says, yes, I actually interacted with them. I'm like, wow. And I'm thinking, we're on a film set, so we're kind of creatives, whatever. But I'm thinking, well, this guy's, he's in the makeup department. He's fairly professional, and I'm thinking he doesn't look like a wacko to me,
Right,
so I'm kind of like, okay, no, do tell what happened. He says, well, I was in New Mexico, and I'd never been to New Mexico, and we were in the desert shooting, but we were staying there all night, and I start looking up, and all of a sudden their ships start flying from the sky, and it was one and then another and then another and then just a bunch of them, and it was like, it almost seemed like I could react and I could think a certain way, and then something a bunch of them would do, and then they wouldn't fall for a while, and then they would, and I'm going, was this in the summer? Yeah, it was. Was it in August?
Exactly.
It was in August. How did you know? Was it like August 11th, August 12th? And he's like, oh my gosh, how would you have known this? And I'm like, well, I was up there and I was looking down on you. And I told you it was an alien. No, I'm like, dude, it's called the Perseid meteor shower. And he's like, what? I'm like, yeah, it happens every year. And then I explained the whole thing about meteor showers. So he was initially partially deflated. He was like, so it wasn't aliens. Well, I said, yeah, actually they were. It's not part of our Earth. It's a big dust cloud left over by a comet, and we smash through it every year. And but he was like, well, it was really cool. I said, yeah, it's really cool. I've seen Perseids, Leonids, Lyrids, Geminids. They're meteor showers are amazing.
Wow.
But he was like, but it wasn't intelligent life. I said, no, it was dust. It was dust. We were plowing through. It was like bugs on a windshield. You're plowing through dust.
All right. So let me ask you in very briefly.
Yeah.
Why was Pluto demoted?
Oh,
planet. That was like one of the saddest days of my life.
Yeah. Was it really? Well, here's an interesting point about Pluto. They recently said we can now mark, because they've gotten so good at calculating Pluto's orbit. Do you realize that a Pluto's year is about 300 or 400 of our years?
Whoa.
So
that.
Basically what they said is, they said, we're now coming around to where it is now in its position. Pretty much the entire history of the United States. A Pluto year ago, there was no United States.
That's incredible.
Well, it's like looking at one of those huge trees in the redwoods, and you're looking at the rings and you're realizing, oh, this ring right here, yeah, that's when Christ was born. This ring right here, yeah, that was the French Revolution, So it's way out there. One of the big things about why they demoted it as a planet, there were certain categories, things that have to fit in for something to be categorized as a planet. And when it was discovered by, oh gosh, Tom is his first name, and I've forgotten Tom's last name now. I'd have to look it up on my phone, but I'm talking on my phone. When it was discovered, it clearly was a wanderer. It clearly was not, a star. It was something that was moving and it was orbiting the sun. But realize also, asteroids orbit the sun. There's a whole cloud of dust called the Oort cloud that's all part of what is part of our solar system. There are planetoids, so they're not quite large enough to be considered planets, but they're still so. In other words, on the one hand, the Planetary Society decided, okay, it's not officially, doesn't really fall under the categories. We narrowed our requirements, I guess. But on the other hand, it's in good company because, and I think one of the reasons they did demote it was that they discovered a bunch of new objects that, although they weren't really quite fitting the category to be named additional planets,
Right.
they all orbit the sun with regular orbits. So I guess the way I'd put it, although Pluto didn't, eventually it was determined Pluto didn't quite fit the requirements for standard planets.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it's in good company because there's a whole bunch of stuff that's orbiting the sun that are not planets, but they are objects that are out there, that do orbit, and they're not just chunks of rock. And some of them are,
That's
um,
amazing. Well, speaking of planets, I want to put up on the screen right now
sure.
some of your pictures that
Oh
you
yeah.
have actually provided. Some of them are like pretty spectacular.
Well, and honestly, I almost now where amateur astrophotography has gone, I almost cringe a little bit when I show these to people and I explain. I go, most of these are real-time images captured by devices that I have that I use for outreach. So in other words, if I'm in a big city, I can neutralize some of the light pollution, and I can literally hook this thing on the camera, and boom, it shows you those kind of images. And that's just a cool way to share with people. But some of the images that guys who are serious about astrophotography do, they absolutely rival Hubble. These shots that I do don't, but some of the pictures some of my friends take, they're amazing. And part of it is the advance in technology and how it's become more affordable. We're using stuff. Go ahead.
Now there's one that is it's like a green circle.
Oh yeah, the Ring Nebula in Lyra. Yeah.
What is that?
And you can see that. Yeah, it's when I show it to people. In fact, I was just showing it to some folks at a monthly outreach we do at the Space Foundation here in the Springs, which is kind of like a small air and space museum. It's supported by a bunch of aerospace companies, and I was showing some people the Ring Nebula, and they're looking at it, and I'm they're like, well, that's amazing. It looks like a donut or a smoke ring, or
Right.
And I said, yeah, it's exactly right. A donut, maybe not such a good comparison. Smoke ring is closer because what it is, it's the remnants of a shell that was blown off by a star that was dying. Typically, what they call a white dwarf. And with a big enough telescope in a dark enough sky, you can still see the star in the center. It's a very faint little star. You can't see it in that picture, but some pictures you can. And basically, when some stars, when they die, just kind of fade out. The nuclear fusion just starts to kind of like a fire going out. Other stars, they expand and they contract. They expand, they contract, and then at one point when they contract, enough pressure happens, they explode, and that's called a nova or a supernova. And we've had those visible throughout history, and we have records like, I believe it was 4 AD. Chinese astronomers observed one that they could see during the day. That's how bright it was. And now, if we take our telescopes and point to where that star was, which we have very good records where it was, what we see is a whole bunch of stuff that looks like plasma coming out. It's basically the remnants of a giant explosion that happened back in 4 AD. This star in Lyra did not explode, but it blew off part of its shell, kind of like a big plasma ring. And as that shell of material is going out into space, the star that's remaining in the center is shooting off massive amounts of X-rays, and the X-rays are hitting the gas and materials and causing it to light up like a neon light. And so it's basically glowing. It's giving off light because it's being lit up by the remaining white dwarf that's at the center of it. So that's why I say smoke ring's probably closer, or neon light ring. I don't know. But yeah, it's very cool. You can see it with small telescopes. Of course, the bigger the telescope, the better the detail. But that's an object, it's a pretty common object that you can see. And it's also an object that's known as a planetary nebula. And there's quite a few of them in the night sky. Now, they're not all rings, but they're rings and spheres and blobs. And the reason they're called planetary nebula is that in the earlier days of astronomy, of visual astronomy, when we had telescopes, they kept looking for planets. Two things that really excited astronomers in the 1800s and 1700s: planets and comets. So they kept thinking they were planets. Oh, we found another planet. And it was like, no, it's not a planet, because it's not sharp and defined. It's more kind of like In fact, some of them, when you look through a telescope, look like a planet. They're not a pinpoint, because stars look like pinpoints. They're
Right.
like a round ball, but it's a round, fuzzy, blobby ball. And that's basically what's left of a star after it exploded or gave off its shell.
Well, thanks for sharing those pictures. Hey, I have one more question, then we'll wrap this up.
Absolutely.
And it's a question we ask everybody on a conversation with. So, first thing that comes to your mind. So here's the question.
Uh-oh.
Where to next? Where would you like to go? Anywhere in the world, anywhere in the US? What's on your bucket list that you would love to go see, to go do? Anywhere.
Oh, wow. Well, you mean as an amateur astronomer or just in
No,
general?
just as
Oh,
John.
oh gosh. Well, as an amateur astronomer, I'd love to get into the southern hemisphere, because the southern constellation. Well, remember, you can only see the stars that because
Yeah.
our Earth goes around like this, goes around the sun, but it doesn't do this. Thank goodness, because we'd all be dead.
So like
But
Australia or something
yeah,
like
Australia, New Zealand, South America, Patagonia, someplace like that, or even the equator, where at the equator you can see all the northern stars, skies, and all the southern skies simultaneously. But I'd love to see, the Magellanic Clouds, which are satellite galaxies to our own. I'd love to see some of the deep space objects that are in the southern skies that I've never seen. And I'd love to see that, but while I'm still kicking.
that. Yeah.
Not to
So is
mention,
that
I'd
your
like to
final
go to New
answer?
Zealand.
Is that your final
Yeah,
answer?
sure, why not?
So Patagonia, Australia, New Zealand,
Australia, New
somewhere in
Zealand,
there.
sure, yeah, yeah.
Um,
But I'm loving what I get to do now. I love doing outreach. I love taking people out. One of my favorite recent events was, we had about 200 Girl Scouts at a kind of a jamboree
oh my
situation, and so this was the club. We set up about 10, 15 telescopes, and these kids were super enthusiastic. But there was like a couple of Girl Scouts, about 4 or 5 of them, that really, and this happens every time, that were just really, really into it. And so and I had the 20 for this event. So they're asking me stuff to show them. And so I'm like, okay, fine, here's one. And I'm showing them all this stuff, and they're asking me these are little kids, and they're asking these really intelligent questions. And I'm just kind of like, wow, okay, you know about that, or you know about edge on galaxies, or you know about, oh, Mr. Doryk, could we see an edge on spiral galaxy? Sure, let me show you. So I'm doing this kind of stuff. And funny thing about this story is that eventually this story got retold a couple nights ago. The club that I belonged to, we had our Christmas party, and we were getting ready to kind of leave, because I got to work in the morning and all this sort of thing. And as we're getting ready to leave, they're getting ready to recognize somebody that the Astronomical Society is going to recognize for their work in outreach. And they talked about how, the work this person has done with our club. We've reached now, in the last year or two, we've done over 200 outreaches and reached close to 16,000 people. And I'm going like, wow, that's amazing. But then they start telling me a story about the person they're going to recognize. And they start talking about how this guy, has acquired telescopes over the years, and recently bought a 20-inch, Dobsonian, and drove all the way to Dallas, Texas to get it. And I'm going, wait a minute, that's me they're talking about. And so my wife's like, I think you need to stay for a few more minutes. And they recognize me, and I mean, they recognize other people too, but they're telling this whole story, and just how passionate this guy is about getting out there and showing people the heavens. And I realized, oh, they're talking about me. So anyway, I got recognized for
Congratulations.
outreach.
Hey, if
Yeah.
somebody, well, first of all, tell us the name of the club you're in.
Oh, sure. Well, yeah. The ministry stuff I do, I don't have an official name. People
Sure.
just find me. They get a hold of me. The club itself is the Colorado Springs Astronomical Society, and their website, which I know they don't mind me sharing it, because that's one of the big things they do, is csastro.org.
And we'll
Yeah,
put that on the screen right
yeah,
here.
for sure.
Now,
Yeah.
somebody wanted to connect with you. How would they connect with you?
Well, probably the easiest way is to go to my website, which is not an astronomy website. It's for my business, but to just go to JOHNDORYK.com, JohnDoryk.com, and it's my music and sound design company, which is ironically, Night Sky Music and Sound Design. Yeah, and I never even thought about that over the years. It was like, it was a name, and then I suddenly realized, oh, Yeah, why do you think you came up with that name? Oh yeah, right. But Night Sky Music and Sound Design, johndoryk.com, because the homepage, there's a link to email me. My email address is a ridiculously long email address, so it's easier to just go to that site and click my name, and you can email me.
Now I'm wearing backcountry.church swag that people can order, but people are going to want to know, what is on your shirt?
Oh, well, okay. So this is actually from the club, Colorado Springs Astronomical Society. Several times a year does events. They have a 40-acre property, like I said, at 9,000 feet. And oh gosh, I need to send you a few more pictures. But they have anywhere up to 400 people get together once, twice a year at an event called the Rocky Mountain Star Stare. And it's basically a 5-night event up in the summertime, up at their field, Starry Meadows in Gardner. And basically, these are people who are passionate about astronomy. They come from all over the U.S. They'll stay for 5 days. It's like it's like Woodstock for nerds.
Wow, that's cool.
But we all get together, we stargaze, we some guys very serious, bringing in astrophotography gear to get pictures, because it is one of the darkest skies in North America. Other people to just stargaze, to enjoy. Some people show up with no gear, and they just want to get a feel what this is all about. I have set up my scopes at that event, and how many times people come walking around. Well, here's the thing: the rule is, you ask, hey, can we look through your scope? But the general unofficial rule is, nobody ever says no. Everybody's, oh, of course, come on. What am I looking? Oh, I'm looking at this galaxy. I'm looking at Saturn. And so people will show up with no gear at all, and it's a camp out. They camp out. We've even had people show up, and I didn't realize this until a few years ago. And they come as far away as Hawaii, as far away as Oregon, as far away as Maine. We've even, in past years before COVID, people were coming from overseas. Wow. They were coming from Europe. The last couple of years that we've come, now that we're back in, because they had to stop for a few years of COVID, we've been sold out. In other words, there's only so many people we're allowed to have on that property, and we've hit that number. But they also have speakers. Like 2 summers ago, we had Harrison Schmitt. And if you don't recognize him, he was one of the last men to walk on the moon. Yeah, and so here's a previous Apollo astronaut who was on the moon, a geologist, and he spoke. He was the speaker for several nights at the event. And yes, they have a meeting room. They have a couple of observatories on the property. They have facilities. They have electricity and so forth. But we all show up: tents, campers, RVs, you name it, and everything from little itsy bitsy, personal telescopes, to big monsters like what I haul around. Well, I have a bunch of them, but yeah, and we just go. We have a blast for 5 nights.
Well, John, you are a delight. I look forward to ice climbing with you.
Absolutely.
Backcountry.church. It's been just a wonderful time here. In the next 30 days, I want you to get out there and see the night sky. Hey, by the way, if you haven't downloaded our app, make sure you go to Google Play or the Apple App Store and download it. Get in that app, get in the conversations with, check out the messages. John, thanks again, everybody. God bless.
Thank you so much. God bless.